Hello, and welcome to the Personal Transformation Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to provide people with the tools, information, and resources they need to achieve successful and optimal outcomes in all aspects of their lives. My name is David Brand.
And my name is Maureen Brand.
And we're really excited that you joined us this week for this particular podcast. We are going to talk about relationships, everybody's favorite topic. But today we're going to talk about what to look for in a relationship and what not to overlook.
Romantic relationships specifically.
To be clear.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking about other kinds of relationships, but more about romantic relationships with respect to yourself and how to find the person that is good for you and who you are right now.
And I believe that you will not likely find who is best for you until you know you best, right? So you really have to know yourself. We had a great conversation the other day that now we're expanding to a wider audience. And it's this idea of who we are, right? How do we figure out who we are? And one of the things that we decided to explore was this idea of a self-culture, right? Because we talk about workplaces have cultures, societies have cultures, right? But relationships have cultures too. But before you can get into a relationship culture, you have to know your own self-culture first, right?
Yeah, I think, when you want to think about finding the right guy and how do you pick, how do you make that choice? How do you decide who is the right person, if you want a partner for life or if you want, somebody just for right now? I mean, just to date, you have to decide what you want. But I think the most important thing is to really know who you are. And that takes time. So, and maturity.
And you came up with this great self-assessment tool.
Right, yeah. So we were talking about self-culture, culture in general. Culture, there's so many different aspects of culture, but self-culture is what we were thinking about. I think you coined that term. I don't know. I've never heard it before, but I
made it up. I simply made it up.
Yeah.
If you find it out there, I didn't read anything.
Yeah, we were just thinking knowing who you are and knowing yourself, but your culture, which includes, self-care, your relationship with, yourself and how you take care of yourself, your well-being, the habits that you have, what kinds of things do you enjoy, what is your relationship to your financial health and money? How do you define your sexuality? What is your relationship with education and learning? How do you feel about recreational substances? And what is your relationship with them? How do you define your spirituality? What are your values, your priorities? Right now, everybody's changes over time, and a lot of this culture will change. It's evolutionary, right? So what works for you now and 20 years from now, these might be defined differently.
Right. We change through time.
We change
too.
over time.
Right.
Yeah. So we change over time. So these things will change over time, but they're good to reflect on when you want to think about choosing a partner, a romantic partner that you want to have a committed relationship with. What is your relationship with nutrition and food? How do you prioritize your physical health and your mental health? What is your relationship with your family, siblings, parents, caregivers? How do you define your relationship with friends, and how do you value friends? How do you feel about children, having them, other people's children? I think the big question is, why are you entering into a romantic relationship?
Well, that's absolutely very true and important.
It's not so much what am I looking for? It's why am I looking for it? Why do you want a romantic relationship? It's all about thinking about what you want and who you are in order to find the person that you think will work with for you. Because I will say, being the age that I am, and this being my second marriage, that your relationship, the decision that you make about the person you want to spend the rest of your life with is probably, in my mind, the most important decision you will ever make. I mean, more important than the car you buy, more important than the house you decide to buy, and even probably more important than even having a child is the person you decide to spend your life with or a long-term commitment with. I mean,
yeah, I think entering into a committed romantic relationship is like starting a business with somebody, right? Think
Very
about
much
it.
so.
You're going to go into business with somebody, but this is the business of life, right? And so there's financial implications. You're buying property, you're having children together,
right?
All these things. Yeah, I mean the romance part, right? That's all part of it too, but that's not the only thing, right? And I think a lot of people when they get into relationships is like, well, do we have sexual chemistry or do we like to go out to bars together, right? And do we like the same music?
Yeah.
And those things are not unimportant, but they're not everything, especially as you get on in the relationship.
Yeah. And I think, I was listening to Esther Perel. She's so amazing. If anybody gets the opportunity to see her, she's in so many different podcasts right now. She's actually doing a tour. I don't know if her tour is still going on, but she wrote a few books, which I can't think of the titles right now, but I'll put them in the podcast notes after this. But she talks about, your first date should be an activity with friends and or family. And if you want to know who you're with, you want to really see who that person is, watch how they respond or react or act around your friends and your family and other people's kids. And pay close attention because that will give you a wealth of information about who they are and the things that they can tolerate, what they enjoy. You'll get a lot of good, and even around, especially pets, right?
So that's a little bit, right, of how to assess someone else's self-culture.
Right.
Right. And I think a couple of things we want to walk through, too, with people is how is that self-culture shaped, right? Because how we got here, how that person you're looking at and their self-culture, right? How did they get here? And I think it's a combination of the relationship they had with caregivers when they were younger,
right?
How they were treated, the experiences that they were exposed to or participated in. And then the other question is, we have to say, why does it matter? But I think we've kind of assessed that. It matters because we need... First of all, how are you going to make that assessment? I hear what you're saying, right? You're going to look at other people and how they are with kids and everything. But if you don't internally know how you are with kids, right?
Right. Well, that's the thing. You really need to know who you are and what you like and what your values are. That's what we're talking about, self-culture.
Because you have to have that self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Because how are you going to consciously be aware of someone else's behaviors in the light that you need to look at them?
Right. You have to have
if you're
self-awareness.
Not aware of your own,
right. Self-awareness is mission critical.
Right. If you don't, if your relationship with money, let's say, is helter-skelter, and you have no idea what's in your bank account, and you just spend money, and you don't know if you pay your bills on time, well, then you're not going to know if the other person does that too. You won't have any frame of reference for it.
Right.
So I think that's the other thing too, is you have to really know what matters, right?
Right, and what matters to you, because what you're going to look through is a lens. You're going to look at the other person through your lens, right? Your personal lens, and whatever that is. So if you grew up in an environment where you had a specific kind of attachment to your mother and a different one to your father, and several siblings, or maybe you were an only child, and let's say both parents were college graduates, and they had you never had, like, not that you were rich, but you didn't have to worry about money. Both parents had cars and you went to college. So you're going to look at that person through that lens, right? Let's say you grew up and that wasn't the case. Let's say you grew up in an environment where you had an abusive parent, and your relationships with your family and your siblings right now might be not great. And you struggle paying your bills, you have financial problems, and you're in and out of jobs. So you're going to look at the other person through your personal lens. So you might look for someone who is familiar, who reminds you or familiar to your environment that you grew up in. And so you're going to find someone with those same issues, because it's almost like you can relate to that. And I think the biggest mistake a lot of people make, I know I made it, is to find a fixer-upper You don't want to find a fixer-upper. You don't want to be like, well, he's got a lot of potential.
I was walking my daughter through some decisions I made earlier in my life yesterday while I was visiting her up in college. And one of the beliefs that I held to all throughout my 20s, and maybe into my early 30s, was that not only could I fix other people, but it was my duty to. I believed it was my mission on this earth to fix and help other people, right? And I learned that, again, going back to relationship with caregivers, right? I had parents that I had to dance around, cater to their emotional whims, their feelings. I had a mother who spent months in bed dealing with bipolar depression, and everybody kind of waited on her. And my father had certain expectations for me when it came to religion and things like that. So my life was in service to others is what I learned. And then when I got into relationships, I continued that pattern, which I think is what you're talking about, these patterns of behavior that we get into when we choose partners, because we're unconsciously in these patterns of behavior, right? I really, really, really thought that my do good in this world is to take broken people and fix them up, right? So there you go, your fixer upper, right? Sounds kind of like you were looking at it that way too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true. I know my first marriage, I believe that that person was a combination of both my parents in one. Not a good combination. Sorry to say. But no, and I realized that that's what I did. I married what was familiar to me.
That's what people generally do, right? And I think that is the really, really tough thing. If you grow up, like now that we've read these books, we've watched these podcasts, and we've seen other people behave, right? And we realize that, hey, we didn't have any model.
No model.
For how to do any of this.
No, but like I said, the different relationships, I don't believe that any one relationship is a failure because of the lessons that you learn from those relationships. And I've said this before, the person that is the most challenging individual in your life is the one you're going to learn the greatest lessons from. And that was my previous marriage. I learned so much about myself through that relationship, within the context of that relationship, and through that relationship about, who I was, what was important to me, where, I found my strength, my courage, and I gained confidence and self-esteem in that relationship. And you would have think like I could have gone two directions, could have torn me down, right? And could have made me feel worse about myself. But I did find a lot of who I am in that relationship. And then of course, when I had a child, everything changed because, Mama Bear kind of comes out and you get very protective. And then you're like, okay, what you might have tolerated before, you no longer will tolerate at all. And so I think that's really important to understand. All relationships, when you're younger, you're going to make these choices. And while maybe they're not successful, you needed to go through that in order to find your gem, so to speak.
Right. And so that's part of self-culture too, right? Is the willingness to take a good hard look at yourself, because when you're in a relationship, it's going to hold a mirror up to who you are.
Yes.
And you have to be willing to look in that mirror. And then step two, say, okay, based on what I'm seeing in the mirror, do I like what I'm seeing in the mirror? If I don't, what am I willing to change? And there is the hard work, right? We've been doing this hard work, and you've held up a mirror to me in this relationship to my own behavior, right? Because bad relationships, I think, don't hold mirrors up to each other. In a bad relationship, somebody gets pissed off at somebody and they shut down and they don't talk to them,
right? And
they ignore them, right? And I did have that behavior modeled for me, time and time again when I was younger. That's what I thought happened when somebody pissed you off in a relationship. You walk away from them and ignore them and shut down. But that actually doesn't help anyone. No,
I think communication, and you have to know what you want in the relationship too. You need to be able to respect the person enough to and feel it's trust. It's respect and it's trust, and knowing that you can be vulnerable in front of your partner and know that they're not going to try to shame you about that vulnerability or use it against you.
Well, if they do, it's not the right partner.
No, it's absolutely not the right partner. Right. So that's a big red flag. I mean, if you open up to somebody and they use that which you told them to shame you or against you or later on, then you need to rethink that relationship, because that's not okay to do. You need to, feel safe. If you don't feel safe, then, you need to leave. So.
Yeah, I know you've been watching a lot lately about the relationships being expansive, right? Because when you, especially like us, right, who came from these really troubled pasts where we didn't have good models and we've been learning everything the hard way. That's why we're doing this podcast, because we did learn a lot of shit the hard way.
Right.
And it's my wish that some people learn things a little bit easier than we did, because we spent a lot of time, money, and effort to get here, right? So,
or at least have the tools,
right,
to know how to learn about yourself. Where to begin. You don't. I was always one to jump in, dive into the deep end, and just swim. Right? But
I mean,
you don't have to do that.
Quite frankly, I mean, I saw some things now. I look back on like, wow, crazy, right? Like my mother actually one time when I was 20 met a guy at a bar, moved in with him the next day, right?
That's a little scary.
Right. And he was a raging alcoholic and smoked pot and did cocaine.
Very impulsive.
And I have no idea what she saw in him, and it didn't work out, needless to say. And they broke up in 3 or 4 months. But after, the fights, right? So those are the kinds of things I saw, right? And it's like, how do you really know what a good relationship looks like, right? When you see things like that, you have no model. And actually, what I witnessed were a lot of fights, and thought, okay, well, that's, relationships are people, butting heads all the time.
Right. So you have to build it from scratch. It's like buying a mixed, a box of for a cake mix, or building it from, making it from scratch. It's a little bit harder. It takes more time. And you really you have to know what works and what doesn't work, but you still can do it, which is what I did. I built my idea of who I wanted to be with from scratch, based on what I learned about myself. And that's what we're talking about.
And oh my God, every relationship I was in before you, I jumped into quickly. And I love some of the things we've been listening to lately about waiting at least a year before you commit to a relationship with somebody, before you even move in with them.
Yes, one full turn around the sun, people.
And, I never did that until I met you. And thankfully, you actually slowed me down a little bit.
I did.
I might have moved faster, but
you did want to move faster. I was like, no.
But one of the corner I turned, when we first met was, I used to get I would meet people and get all these butterflies, everything, like a kid, and like, oh, this is the one, and like, no, right? If you walk away on your first date with somebody going, this is the one, your compass is probably not set right. And I'm going to just say that. And if somebody's out there and happily married 20 years because you met your partner on a Wednesday night and moved in with them on Thursday and it's worked out and you've 5 kids and you have a very successful life, then
but that's not to say
that's great.
Yeah.
Right? I don't advocate for doing it that way.
Well, no, but you can meet somebody and have really good chemistry with them. And after that first kiss, you have something in you could have a really good instinct about them. Be like something, your gut tells you.
But I don't think.
But I'm not saying I'm going to marry this guy
or move in with them. The
right?
Next day
No, that's not what you want. But
right.
you want to listen to your gut and be like, okay, this went well. It's worth exploring.
Right.
And I'm excited about it. You could have those butterflies and enjoy that. I mean, my God, after our first kiss, I was like floating, I'm thinking this is so great.
Well,
and then
it was a very great feeling, a very pleasant feeling, but I didn't.
But I went home with a smile on my face. My point is, I'm like, wow, this is exciting, because I didn't anticipate meeting someone that would go anywhere anytime soon. So
me neither. But I was conditioned though to thinking that if I didn't feel after the first date like this was the person I was meant to be with, then it wasn't the right relationship. That's what I was conditioned for. So it was very tricky for me to say, oh my God, I'm not feeling anxious about this, but it's okay because I don't need to feel anxious.
So you were waiting to feel anxious about it.
I was waiting to feel like, oh my God, is this the one I'm meant to be with, right? And getting all up here on it.
Oh, that's not what you want to feel.
So
yeah,
when you look back at, and we should really explore this more because people watching this podcast really don't know much about me. But the religious aspect of my upbringing
right.
was like, you don't date people unless you're marrying them, right? Your sole purpose in dating people, the way I was raised, was to find a mate, right? And people, the way I grew up, were marrying each other at 16, 17, 18 years old. That was a norm.
Insane.
And you didn't date somebody. You had to know everything you could about them and go on the date. And the expectation was you were dating because you already knew that this was the person you wanted to marry.
Yeah.
Right? So I had that. Then I had my mother who would jump into relationships, move in with people after a day or two. There were several relationships like that. So I had this like distorted lens, really, about... So then my thought was, if I went on a date and didn't think that you were the person I was going to marry, I was like, I'm not sure if this is the right one. Which obviously not we're advocating here, but but this is where I was coming from.
Right.
And this is why it was so unusual for me. Right. And even when something happened, a few days later, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to lay back here and not rush into this. That was unusual for me, to the point where you kind of were like pursuing me a little bit. But I was always a pursuer. I was always like, I got to make this relationship. This is the one.
Right, but you kind of want that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's good. That's a big flip for you. So you were the one who was being pursued, and you were like, you probably were having a lot of confusing thoughts about that, right? What were you what did you think when? I mean,
well, what I would try and do in prior relationships is fuse with somebody like immediately. Now, there were partners that I chose that also chose me at the same time, right? It does take two to tango, who, for whatever reason, right, needed that fusion as well. So, you had a situation where I would get into a relationship and then get glued to somebody like immediately. And I thought that was how it worked.
Yeah.
And I really needed... if you're in a situation where you need to be in a relationship to exist, right? At some point you have to look in the mirror and say, why is that? Right.
Right.
Why do I feel that way? Why do I feel that I'm not? Because you really need to come into a relationship being whole on your own, being complete on your own, right? That whole fucking myth from that movie with Tom Cruise, right?
You complete me. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That,
no.
We're not out here in the world with
crap,
incomplete people.
Right.
Right. And I'm 40% and you're the other 60%.
Well, that's the question. How do you...
We're only 100% together.
Yeah.
No.
How do you not lose yourself?
We're each 100%.
Yeah.
And we're 100% together.
Correct. And you're
people
enough.
don't get it because it's not an equation, right?
Right.
It's not like we're each part of 100%. I always, it's a joke, right? That's my better half, right? But you're not half and I'm not half. We're both whole people coming together in a great relationship.
Right. And that's why you ask yourself the question, why do I want to be in a relationship? What am I looking for? Not what am you looking for?
That's a good point.
Why do I
What's
want to
your
be in a
motivation?
relationship
Right.
in general? Like, you don't want to lose yourself in a relationship.
Right.
But when you enter a relationship, and Esther Perel said this beautifully, she talked about you go into a relationship because you see parts of yourself or parts of that person that you want to be. Like, they hold your yin to your yang, so to speak, right? So
it's complementary.
It's complementary.
It's not.
It should be complementary.
It's not two incomplete
So
pieces.
when I looked at you and I when I met you, and I was like, you had, first of all, we had the same, I felt the same aspirations about things, and we agreed a lot about things. But I looked at you and saw this sort of well-educated person who was kind of in control and organized and, just had parts of your personality that I wanted to have, right? So how I identify bringing you into the mix, you're going to compromise not compromise. What's the word I'm looking for? You're going to share some of who you are with that person. And with that person, you're going to come out of that with another sense of self. with that other person. That doesn't mean you sacrifice who you are and your own identity, but naturally, when you go into a relationship, and you meet somebody else, part of you being in that relationship blends together aspects of yourself that are new. Like you create new aspects of yourself is my point.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's making any
tease out something you just said because, and by the way, for everybody watching, we don't super hard rehearse this, right? This is just we start having some loose conversations. We bring it in front of the camera, but so we're gonna disagree at times.
Yeah,
and maybe this isn't one of those times. It might be. I'm not sure, but I was thinking about you chose me because I'm organized. But did you? One of the things you liked about me, let's put it that way, was that I was organized. But would you say that you felt that you were disorganized when you met me?
No. So,
okay.
Because
what I'm
going to look
at
at my
is
notes.
People getting the relationship because they're like, I don't do that well. They do it well, right?
Yes.
And I don't always know that that's a good recipe, though, right? Because if, like you said, well, I like to clean and they like to make a mess. So together, he cleans up my messes.
Right.
Because that's going to suck for the person that cleans up the mess.
Agreed.
Right? So, right, like I'm bad at finances. He's good at finances, right? That's not going to work. So I just wanted to be clear. I wasn't sure. I almost felt like I heard you saying that this notion of, right, the things I aspire to be better at, I seek out in a partner. Right.
Yes, but that's true. Here's the thing. This is the notes I took.
But you don't want it to be a dump on the other partner.
No, absolutely.
So I just want to make sure we're clear.
But so the thing that I wrote, because I was watching these videos and I was doing the research on this, I wrote, we recognize parts of ourselves in another. This is Esther Perel.
Right.
We want to change a part of ourselves and see those differences in another person and or discover and find new aspects of ourselves. So I did recognize parts of myself in you. And maybe I wanted to change certain parts of myself and I see those differences in you or discover new aspects of myself. So like, I don't feel like I'm disorganized at all. I mean,
I wasn't trying to say that you were.
I mean, that was just an example, but like,
yeah.
I love that you were so highly educated and I love that we had such great conversations. And I love to learn from somebody, and I fed off of that.
So that's inspirational.
Yeah, it's inspirational.
Yeah.
But you're right. It can go in the other direction, and you could meet somebody, like, let's say I was a complete slob, and I'm like, wow, this guy's super clean. Maybe, I'll bring
Maybe he can
fix me.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're going to come in, but the fixing up for you is to do.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You don't encourage the person to clean for themselves. You just do it. And I think a lot of times you lack the confidence in your partner to get things done. That's my gripe. But anyway.
Yeah, we could go down another route.
We can go down another route.
But you were almost leaning to something called codependency.
Yeah.
But I think I've said this in another podcast. I really love the book Codependent No More.
Yeah,
It was one of the first self-help books I ever read. I forget her first name, but the last name is Beatty. But great book. But that said a whole idea of, right, this person has all these issues, but I'm good at those things. I'm going to fix those things for them, right? So you kind of have this codependency, right? I need them to fuck up so I can fix them. And they kind of need me in some way, right? To be around to convince them, like if they're a drug user, right? Well, I use drugs because of you, right? I think somebody actually said that to you once. You told me, right?
Yes.
Right. So now you're the excuse.
Like
for
suddenly
them.
I'm responsible for their behavior.
You're the excuse or the cause of their bad behavior.
Yeah, that's
right?
bullshit.
And so, you get caught in these loops with people. But so, I mean, this is all, hopefully we're not going off on too many tangents, but I just wanted to pick on that a little bit. Because I do think there's some aspect,
but that's really important.
Of people saying, "Well, I'm gonna look for somebody like this because I'm not good at that." But if you're not good at that, and you don't want to change that, and the other person is, you might create a situation where now your self culture is not aligned.
Right. Again, there we go back to knowing yourself really well. But there's also the notion that people, most of us want balance. So why was I drawn to you? Why were you drawn to me? Why were you drawn to me?
Well, physical attraction was definitely part of it. But I think from a spiritual standpoint, we saw things very similarly, right? In terms of like working on ourselves, the kinds of things that we listened to, the books that we read. I felt, and I know it has come true, right, that I would be able to, you would enhance my personal growth. So, right? Because I was on a journey of personal growth like I had never been on before in my life when I met you. And I felt like with you, that would fuel my growth, right? So it was a very positive reason, not that you would enable me to, in a way, yes, you haven't enabled, you've given me the space to grow. I just want to be careful with the use of the word enable, right? But I
inspired you to do it.
Encourage me to grow too, right? So I feel like we do. Again, my daughter and I were having this conversation yesterday, especially in the case of children, right? Because there's some type of balance between supporting somebody, encouraging them, and pushing them, right? I don't feel that you've ever pushed me, right, in a certain direction. I think you've supported me and you've encouraged me, right? Because if you go into pushing, right, you said, I really wish you would quit drinking alcohol altogether, right? Like that might be like pushing somebody, right? I'm not sure if that's the best example. But
well, you don't stop drinking, I'm leaving. That's a push.
Yeah, well,
that's a demand.
That becomes a demand that you're putting on somebody,
yeah, well, that's,
right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, if that person's an alcoholic, that may be a reasonable demand. If they have one drink a week, I'm not sure that is.
Yeah, it might be over. Yeah. Well, again, the lens, right?
Yeah.
So I could have easily gone there because I'm hypersensitive to people who drink even a little bit because I grew up with an alcoholic parent.
As did I.
Right. So I really am anxious when people overdrink, and it makes me extremely uncomfortable. I don't like being with somebody who can't control their alcohol intake. And so that's never really, well, maybe one time, but but like.
Well, even, maybe in my example, right, if you were with somebody that got drunk every single Friday night.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't do it.
That would be different than having one drink here and there, right?
Yeah,
so,
no, I couldn't do
that.
I
mean, there's all kinds of things. But again, getting back to the example, saying if you don't stop drinking, or how about you start with, in that particular example, if you don't get help for your misuse of alcohol, right? I mean, if the person disagrees, like, hey, I get drunk twice a week, that's my business, I'm not misusing alcohol, no, I'm not going to get help. Well, that probably tells you a lot, right?
Yeah.
If they're not willing to do anything, right? Because I think it's hard to demand that somebody change, but I think you have a right to ask them to get help.
Well, that's the thing.
Right?
We go back to the fixer-upper. You have to be really careful. You don't want a fixer-upper. You want somebody who already, has their shit together.
Right. Like I think I want to say it louder for the people in the back, right? Because I think we just landed something we haven't talked about yet. When somebody's got an actual issue, right? So again, going back to that self-culture and the relationship people have, if somebody has, I think we can all agree, if somebody is, doing lines every weekend, right? Ugh. Probably not good. Probably we're not in the camp that's an acceptable behavior, right?
Basically,
okay.
Yeah.
So, if you came to somebody and said, you have to stop doing cocaine or I'm leaving, I think that's tough for that person, right? Because how are they going to stop doing cocaine? Just going to go cold turkey if they've been doing cocaine for years? No. But I think the more appropriate response, if you're in a committed relationship with somebody and you want to see the relationship work out, is to say to them, I am asking you to get help. Whether or not you agree you have a problem, I want you to see somebody about this, right? I need you to see somebody about this. And if they say, well, I'm not going to see anybody about this, I don't think I have a problem, then you could say, I'm out, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's a difference between asking someone, you have to quit drinking or I'm leaving, versus you need to get help for your drinking or I'm leaving, right? Because somebody can't quit on their own, right?
No, and that's a whole nother conversation.
To things, right? So demanding that someone quit an addiction or you're going to leave, I don't think that's the right approach.
No.
Right? No. You have to, but you have a right to demand that somebody get help for something.
Yeah, but the thing is, we want to back up a little because, when you met this person and you entered in a relationship with them, did you not know that they were
Well, that's the whole other thing, right?
Doing these drugs.
Change,
so that's why
right?
we talked about what is your, one of the, in the self-culture. And I will provide this list in the show notes because we created it together. And I think it's pretty effective. But what are your, how do you feel about recreational substances, whether you're using them or somebody else? If that's a hard stop, a hard no, well then, yeah, you need to know,
some people
what
make
the signs
excuses
are
for people. Well, they do smoke
Oh,
pot.
they only,
I don't smoke
yeah.
pot, but they only do it a couple days a week, and I like everything else about them. Those things become splinters, right, in the relationship that are very hard to remove later. So you have to be really sure. But I also want to back up to that too, because what if when you get in the relationship, you're both going out every weekend and you go out and you like having a few drinks and you go out but all of a sudden 5 years into the relationship, you decide, you know what, I don't want to drink anymore. And I don't want to go out and I don't want to go out to bars anymore. The other person does.
Right.
Now what? You've changed and they haven't.
Right. You've changed and they haven't. So one person's growing up, the other one isn't. And that's a problem too.
I want to be careful to say about growing up, right? Because some people can continue to go out and have one or two drinks, right? And not get inebriated. And they're very social, right?
Right.
And they enjoy that. And maybe the other person, now that's no longer a feature in their life.
Right. But
then what?
Relationships are, and Esther, again, I'm going to bring up Esther Perel because she's like the guru of relationships.
Because I love this part.
She believes that relationships are living, moving parts. I mean, it's a living, breathing entity, right? Between, and it has all these moving parts. And it grows and it evolves. And sometimes it grows in two different directions, right? You go this way, they go that way. And so she talks about, okay, so a lot of people, you will back up even more, but somebody might say, I want to be with you because you help me be the best version of myself. And you have said that.
I will definitely say that about you, 100%.
That's 100% true. And if that's something that you hear from somebody, that's a great thing because that means that you are helping them, holding up a mirror to them. And if you feel the same way, if they're helping you to be the best version of yourself, well, then you're able to look in the mirror that they hold up and be accountable and responsible for who you are and yourself and your aspirations and inspirations are in the context of that relationship. But she talks about two types of relationships. And I love this because, she says that in the Western world, most people are in 2 or 3 relationships in their lives. And that makes a lot of sense because, when you're 20, if you meet somebody in your early 20s, even in your early 30s, she said there's 2 types of relationships. A cornerstone relationship, which is how you meet someone in your early 20s and you grow with them, you build your life with them, you build your finances, you continue your education, you have children, you build a life, you buy property or whatever you buy, and you discover who you are with that person rather than discovering who you are on your own. But you discover who you are with that person. She says, sometimes those relationships work. Sometimes people stay together or they fail, you divorce, and then you marry 1 or 2 more times. But you can divorce and remarry the same person a couple more times. Because if you're that young, you're going to grow and to grow and evolve with that person in the same way and not grow apart is a miracle.
Well, there are people that
and there's lots of people
marry
that
their high school sweethearts, and then they are married until they each die. Right?
Yeah, and those are great. I'm sure either they're great relationships or people just stayed in it because they felt it was morally right to do. So that's that's just
I have known of couples who are getting on in years where they slept in different bedrooms. They went on separate vacations. They had separate friend groups. They didn't do anything together.
Yeah, I know someone who married, who met their husband when they were 16, 17 years old and stayed with them their entire lives and hated them, but stayed in it because they didn't want to, they didn't want the change. They didn't want to they stayed in the relationship. And even when, it was awful. So, I just think that that's what people do. And, out of fear, you don't want to, you have kids and you're so dug in and if you break.
But on that, you have kids, how important it is to model behavior, right?
Yes.
Because as we have learned from our caregivers about relationships,
Yeah.
our children learn from us on how they see relationships, right? So people stay with each other that are miserable, have grown completely apart.
Right. And they're not nice to each other, and they're, verbally abusive, and yeah, your children are seeing everything you're doing. And your children are going to marry what they know, right? So they're going to find a partner who reminds them of their own parents and their relationship. And if it was a bad one, then unfortunately, they're probably going to make the same mistake. It becomes generational. So I think, which is one of the main reasons why I decided to leave my first marriage. And
this is why we're here today.
Yes.
We don't want people to keep repeating generational trauma.
Yeah. It's really important to understand it and have that awareness. But the other type of relationship is called a capstone relationship, where you meet the person later in life. And this, you know who you are and you know what you want, right? And what you don't want. So you become, that person is the confirmation and can validate who you know you are, right? So you validated who I was based on all that I learned about myself. So you confirmed and validated my sense of self. And I was able to do that through you, which is what I was talking about earlier, where you kind of build another sense of self through that person, but that person validates what you've already learned about yourself. So you have your job, you have your education, you have your children, if you have children, and everything you've already built. You meet somebody and you invite each other into each other's lives, but you're already settled. Like you're not learning who you are with that person. You know who you are. They validate and confirm who you are and what you know about yourself. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And that's why we are in a capstone relationship.
I feel that.
And
the capstone relationship is generally the last one, right?
Not necessarily.
Oh, shit.
But it could, the capstone relationship just means that you've already been there and you've grown, and you have your sense of self. You can continue, like people are remarrying at 60, right? I mean,
yeah.
So I met you, I was in my 40s, right? So, I mean, it could be the last relationship you have, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is.
When my prior relationship ended, I said I would never get in another relationship again. And here we are 15 years later.
Yeah, well.
But I waited a year to look around.
Yeah, I didn't. But I didn't anticipate. Yeah, I was just.
But your relationship was over before you left.
It was over 2 years before I left.
How many people stay in relationships that are really over, and it's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for it, but it's like living like a ghost in a relationship.
Oh my gosh, there's a term for that. Hold
really?
on. Yes.
Yeah, because I've done that before.
It's called. And
I've been done with relationships and stayed in them for various reasons, like a ghost. But
where did she go? Oh, ambiguous loss. So the person is physically present, but they are emotionally not there.
Oh, wow. Ambiguous loss?
Ambiguous loss. Thank you, Esther Perel.
Loss or lost?
Loss. Ambiguous loss. It's like,
wow.
It's like having when you have a parent with dementia,
right.
Like my dad, like he was there, he wasn't there, he was there. Like they're physically there, but they're not emotionally or cognitively present anymore. Yeah.
Kind of like a bonfire where there's a bunch of charred wood, but there's no more fire.
Yeah. And the most important thing is that you're in a relationship, and this is something I love, what I learned again from Esther Perel. If you want to change the way somebody's responding to you, you need to change yourself. Mm-hmm. So change who you are and the way you react or respond to that person, and they will have no choice but to change. So it's like reinforcing behavior, right? If you think about children, you want to stop your child from screaming, change the way you respond to their screaming, right? Change it and they will stop. So but it's, there's different kinds of conflict, but this is really more about finding who you are. Oh, Mating in Captivity. Sorry, that's Esther Perel's, one of her books. She wrote a couple of them, but the most recent, I think, which was actually, I think about 10 years ago, is Mating in Captivity. And so how do we reconcile the two sets of fundamental needs, right? And how do you learn to live with conflict? because
right. Conflict is necessary.
it's necessary for a healthy relationship. You have
Right.
to have conflict. Otherwise, I don't know. Maybe you're Cinderella.
And you will fight, right? But not to the point where you're insulting your partner or physically abusing them, right? We're not talking about that's not appropriate. But in the context of, I mean, there's going to be escalations at time, but I think a lot of people think that's not healthy. Now, I think if you do that all day, every day, that's probably something's wrong, right?
People are going to get irritated and annoyed with each other. I mean, it's human. It's part of being
right,
human.
but it's better to express that, to hold it in. My mother would just constantly talk about what people did behind their back. Like,
well, that's not healthy.
And then she would blow up, right? And then explode on somebody, right? And they're like, where is this coming from, right? Because that's the other thing, right? You feel a certain kind of way and you don't tell your partner, and like all of a sudden something happens, right? And now everything comes out, right? So it wasn't about whatever that small incident was. Like you forgot to pick something up at the grocery store and they lay into you for an hour, right? And it wasn't about that.
No,
event.
it's usually not about what you're actually fighting about.
It's that they've let things,
it's
build
something
up
else.
and pent up all this time. So I mean, it's definitely healthy to get that out. But again, going back to this whole idea we started with this culture, right? Because the relationship ends up having a culture, but I think a growth mindset, we talk a lot about that in leadership at work, but a growth mindset, right, I think that's one of the most key things, right?
Curiosity.
But are you really concerned and embracing a growth mindset, right? Personal growth and development.
Yeah.
I would say yes, right? You're sitting here, all these things, these podcasts. Why the hell would you be a student of all these people, right?
Yeah.
If you weren't like, how do I apply it in my life so I can grow?
Right.
And I love listening to what you're sharing with me, and I'm listening to podcasts on my own. So we both have this growth mindset because now what happens is the relationship is in a growth mindset, right? So we're both now, the lens, right, that we have is around growth. So when you say something to me, I'm looking at it, how is this an opportunity for me to grow?
Right.
Not, why is she telling me that she's annoying me, right? So, I mean, so again, this colors.
Which I don't usually think first.
we have this umbrella, right, over us, that this organizing principles in our relationship, that it's around growth, right? So if you're telling me something, I'm assuming that you're helping me to learn from something and to grow, right? So it's that assume positive intent that you're coming at me with something, right? Not to belittle me or piss me off, but to really point something out I'm doing. And so I think,
it's expression.
I'm so open to, in all aspects of my life, not just our relationship, but how do I learn from this person? How do I learn from this experience? But we're doing that constantly in the context of a relationship. And that is all the difference. Because all this other stuff, right? We had to come in from day one. The good thing is that we met on Match, right? So when you go on the Match, you have to really know yourself well. And people ask me, how did you meet somebody on Match? I'm like, because I really knew who I was. You have to be honest with yourself, right?
Right.
If you go on the Match.
Well, you don't have to be. People lie. But
well, no, I'm saying for it to be successful, right? We're talking about we are here on this podcast to talk about successful relationships, not ones that are going to blow up, right?
Right.
So if you lie to yourself and lie to other people, that really, I have to believe that almost never works out, right?
No, it won't work.
So you were honest about the things you like and enjoy doing, the hiking, the yoga, and just talking and reading, right? And I had those things down. And so because I had things down that kind of matched up with what you said about yourself, because we were both true to ourselves and being honest, probably more than we'd ever been in our life, the algorithms, right, in the system brought us together.
Well,
right?
I think the most attractive aspect of you when I met you was your ability to be truly genuine to who you were. Like you were genuine. And
authentic, right?
And authentic,
right? It means you're real. You're not bullshitting.
Yeah, there was
people,
no, like, I
things.
never got the sense, I have a really sharp bullshit radar.
What you see is what you get.
Yeah, and
right?
People who are disingenuous, I don't have any tolerance for that. I don't.
Even the way I dressed in the first date.
Yeah.
Right? I think we told that story a few weeks ago that, I was like, I anguished over it, right?
Yeah.
If that's the right word. And I said, you know what? It's like 85 degrees. I'm just going to put shorts on, a polo shirt, and a pair of flip-flops. And that's how I'm going to go on this date.
And it was awesome because when I pulled up.
That's how I'm most comfortable.
Yeah. When I pulled up in my car and I saw him sitting on, I'm like, that has to be him. And I laughed to myself. I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Like, you were not dressed to impress. I was like, this is awesome. You know, like and I didn't feel like, oh, well, he doesn't, even want to try to impress me. You didn't do anything to try to impress me.
Well, because I wanted you to see me as I was, right?
But that's what got me, though.
I was, right?
I didn't want.
That's
authentic. I can't, like, in the past, every man I tried to date, they were always like, trying to impress me and with their, cars or whatever it was stupid stuff. And I'm just like, Well,
what if you go on a date or somebody dresses a certain way and you're like, oh, wow, I really like the way they dress. And then the next date, they look completely different.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's the thing.
Then you don't know what you're getting.
Well, you were consistently genuine and truthful. And
I love that. Consistently genuine, right? Consistently authentic. Yeah. Those are the things that are important.
Yeah. I mean, and you weren't like putting on any airs and you didn't try to talk yourself up or anything like that. Like, you were genuinely interested in me. I could see you studying me. Like, I could feel it. And I was like, I didn't mind it at all. It didn't make me uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form. I was like, okay, because I was doing the same thing. So I think that's so important. You want to make sure that you have that comfort level with somebody. I didn't feel anxious. I mean, I wasn't dressed up, but I dressed good.
You were beautiful. And I mean, I still remember everything you wore that day.
So do I.
It was over 15 years ago. I think it's still in your closet, right? But
the tops are not in my closet. I
don't have anything I wore.
I have, the only thing I have still are the shoes that I wore.
Right.
But I do have the white, no, I didn't wear those white pants. No, I wore a skirt.
All right. I don't know if anybody cares about these
it doesn't matter.
Details, but
so
the idea was that we were ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And we have always been ourselves. I don't think there's ever been a time where I felt like I had to put on some type of actor show around you. I don't even know what that is.
Right.
Like, I couldn't even think about what would that even look like? I have no clue because I don't operate that way.
I don't have any ability to lie well because I can't think that.
I know, it's like,
it's too confusing.
Sometimes at work people say to me, well, you have to know how to play the game. And that has always been my struggle.
I can never,
right, is, you have to know how to talk to and it's true, right? You do have to know contextually out, right, in the workplace,
business world,
whole different thing, how to talk, how to say there, how to read a room. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about here in a relationship, right? Because if you feel like you have to talk a certain way around the person you're in a romantic relationship with or walk on eggshells, that's going to be a problem, right?
Right.
You can't be, or you have to be able to be your authentic, genuine self consistently, to use the word. I never thought of it that way, but you have to be able to be consistently yourself.
Consistently yourself,
right?
Yeah.
Because, if you had a certain expectation for me and I was trying to live up to that, right, I would combust, right? And this is what leads to people having substance issues and affairs and things like that, because they can't be consistently genuine within that relationship.
And I think a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, I know that I used to be like, well, what if they don't like who I am? But I didn't know how to be any other way. And I've heard other friends say that, what if they don't like who I am? Then they don't like who you are. Then you need to move on.
Right. They're not right for you.
They're not right for you. And that's a good sign to say if these people don't like,
right. Who's not right for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope in this time that we spent together, because we did say at the onset, we're going to talk about what to look for and what not to overlook. Right. I think we've kind of covered the bases on that. I just want to make sure. I always like to true everything up for everybody if we said we were going to talk about that. Right. Because we heard that whole podcast, relationship red flags.
Yes.
Right. But what's going to be a red flag to you is not going to be a red flag to somebody else, right? So you have to know, and again, if you know you and your own self-culture, then there will be red flags, right? Let's try and think of a great example of that, right?
So, a big red flag would be if someone's not forthcoming with who they are, whether they were married before, if they have children before. That's a huge red flag.
They don't talk to their family.
They don't. Right. If someone doesn't talk to their family or their family hates them, and they don't want to bring you around their family, that's a red flag.
My father and mother disowned me, right?
Right. Right. My family, if they don't have a lot of friends or they don't want to bring you around their friends, that's a big red flag. right? If they say, I mean, if they're secretive or not forthcoming with information, you're feeling like, they're lying to you, or they ghost you. That's a red flag.
And get a background search on everybody.
Right. Get a back. Well, I didn't do that the first time.
We have computers and everything. There's tons of information. Get a background search.
Yeah.
Right. And encourage the other person to do the same. Right. I mean, you really want to make sure that you know who they are. But aside from that, right, some things are going to be obvious, right? People work out or not, right? Like if you like to work out, you're concerned about physical fitness, and you work out every day and you run 3 miles a day, and the other person just sits on the couch and never exercises, that's probably not going to work.
Right. I mean, but pay attention also to how they are in a restaurant, how they treat the wait staff,
other people, right?
How they talk to other people.
That's a very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about somebody that we took out to lunch. Yeah. And somebody told me you should always take, especially if you're going to hire a senior executive leader, go out to lunch with them and see how they talk to people, because that's how they're going to talk to your employees.
Yeah. Fair,
right? Same thing in a relationship, right? If they start complaining at the wait staff, and
or they're rude,
the food's terrible.
Right.
I have some family members that do that. Right?
Yeah, they're rude, or they treat people dismissively. Who are the wait staff and stuff. That's a big red flag. Like you need to pay attention to that. I mean, look, and if you feel like it's fine and you do the same thing, well then, hey, then I guess you're both doing a match made in heaven. But
right,
it depends on what your values are. Like know what your values are. What your morals are, what your, all those questions we asked in the beginning. And again, I will provide the list of your own self-culture and what's important to you and what your priorities are. I think most people want honest, genuine, authentic people who can be consistently that way, in any that traverses all areas of their life. Right. So if you're honest and genuine in your relationship, chances are you're going to be honest and genuine in your friendships. You're going to be that way at work. It's going to, go across all aspects of your life.
Yeah, really? I've heard people say, well, that's my non-work self and my work self. I call bullshit on that. You really, you should be the same person wherever you are, right? Now, I understand this decorum, right? You don't.
Right, you're going to be professional at work.
You're not going to throw F-bombs around at work. Well,
right.
We might at where I work, but but I mean, you don't want to be a completely different person, right? You should not have to put on an act in your relationship and then put on an act at work, right? Because you want to be authentic and consistently authentic and genuine.
Yeah.
I love that you coined that, right? I'm sure you didn't, but I mean, I love the fact that you said that, because now it's going to resonate with me. That I always feel like if there's a podcast I can listen to, a book I can read, or a person I can have a conversation with, what's one thing I can take away? And being consistently genuine and authentic, I think, is key.
Yeah, holding on to who you are, even when people don't agree with you, right? And, I think also, like I said earlier in the beginning, go on a date and do an activity that challenges you maybe physically. I mean, if this is what you like to do. For me, I would have thought, now thinking back, I probably would have thought, let's go on an activity that challenges us both physically.
Oh, that's a good call.
And see how he responds if I win.
I hadn't thought about that.
Because you can,
like playing golf or bowling or something.
If somebody is like a sore loser, that's
Oh, I can't believe I got beat by a woman, right?
Right. Yeah.
You'd be like, what?
What? Yeah. So pay attention to how people respond. Like do something of skill that you can do well. And maybe there's some things that you can't do well and that person can do them well. Are they going to support you and help you through those things that they see you struggling with? Right. I mean, I was watching Jay Shetty and he was interviewing his wife, and he talked about his first date with her. And they went on this thing called Monkey Man or Monkey something, where it's like parkour here. It's like a little mini parkour. So, and they had asked, they were doing this together, and there were things that she was really good at that he wasn't, that she helped him, and that stuff that some parts of it where, she was really challenged and he helped her.
Yeah.
But that is a great way to get to know somebody and see, who they are. And that's a little bit stressful.
We actually did go hiking with
We did.
Yeah, early on in the relationship. I mean, we had a really aggressive hike up in the Catskill Mountains.
Oh my God, it was so cold and it was snowing.
Yeah, my back was.
And I started to hyperventilate because I was breathing too hard.
Time,
yeah, we had a good time. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, that was a good. Yeah, I think doing activities like that, I think, are really good.
Yeah.
Social events, right? Or even when you know it's becoming more serious, bringing them around your family members that have children, right? If you know that you want to have children, or you already have children, right? In our case, right?
We did a play date.
Yeah. And how do the children play together?
Right. And how are we with our children individually?
Yeah.
How are we responding to their children? You know, like that's a big deal.
Yeah. And you you brought me around your mother, so you got to see how I would talk to her, interact with her. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, there was a lot of, exposure, right? So you're kind of like putting each other in a petri dish, as it were, to kind of see, well, how do they show up in these moments, right?
Yeah.
Because you really, again, going back to that, wait a year, right? Take a year. I shouldn't say not just wait a year, but take a year, right? To really assess that person's self-culture. What are they like? What is their worldview? How do they interact with other people, right? Is this going to mesh with you?
Yeah, I don't know if I read it somewhere. Years ago, I heard someone say that when you enter in a relationship, you want to see how they are in every season of life. So you want to see how they are January, February, March, April, May, June, like how they are in every season of life, every holiday, how they respond when the time changes. I mean, because people, some people have serious issues with time change, can become, so you want to kind of learn, and see who they are.
I had never thought about that.
Yeah, see who they are in every season of life. And that's really important. And if you go through or one time around the sun and you still need to know more, then take another time. What's the big deal? Like take your time, because it's a really important. If you're looking for a committed romantic relationship, and you want to spend your life, you want to have children with this person, or this is somebody that you want to consider for the rest of your life, if that's what you want to do, I think that's so important to see them in every season of life. So,
no, 100%. I had never thought about that.
Because people respond differently in different times of the year. Different things happen. You don't know what happens in their lives, maybe.
But I think it's important to talk, right? Like, what is like political views, right? I think to some extent you probably want to be somewhat aligned on your political values there too, especially right now in this very divisive culture that we have.
Yeah.
Right? How do you feel about different political policies and approaches?
Right.
Because that could become contentious.
Well, in the beginning of our relationship, we did something on the phone because we talked so much. We did this quid pro quo thing. Quid pro quo.
Okay.
Right? We did that.
Refresh me, because now I'm not sure where you're going.
So we were talking on the phone, and I was like, we went back and forth. So he would ask me questions, and it was like interviewing each other, You would start, and then I would go, and then I would go, and then you would go. And we took turns asking questions that we wanted to know, like just random questions that I wanted to see his response to. And it was a good way to, it's like, you want to interview. It's like an interview. You go back and forth and you just, I don't know, you don't remember?
No, but anyway, go ahead, tell the story.
So the story is we were just on the phone, and we were going back and forth asking questions. And this was when you said to me, you asked me a question. I can't remember actually what we asked each other, but I remember how I felt about it. And I remember you asked me something that was emotional, and I got a little upset, and you said to me, well, I would if you need to walk through that fire, I'll hold your hand while you walk through that fire, or storm rather. I'll hold your hand. You're going through a storm. I'll hold your hand through that storm, and protect you from the lightning or something like that. It was just beautiful. And I was like, wow, I can't believe he just said that to me. Like that was, I think I wrote it down actually, in my journal. But yeah, you said something to me about, going through this.
I do remember
storm.
telling you that, because I've always been inspired by that movie with Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come.
Oh.
Where if people listening or watching haven't seen that movie, I would recommend it. It can be hard emotionally for someone to watch, but this whole idea is that the children die, he dies, he's a husband, and then finally this woman kills herself. And they don't let people commit suicide into heaven, so she ends up in limbo. And he's in heaven, of course, with their children, and he crosses over to limbo and leaves heaven and goes to limbo to try and bring her to heaven with him. And she's such in a bad place that he can't. I don't even think she knows who he is at one point. And
yeah, she was really messed up.
he finally says, I'd rather sit with you in hell for eternity than be in heaven by myself. Right. So, it's just, I've always thought about that.
Yeah.
Whether it's my children or you, whatever you're going through, I'd rather sit with you and with whatever you're going through than be sitting by myself. I wouldn't, and watching you suffer, right? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
To me
So you basically said, I'll walk. If you have to go through that storm, I will walk beside you in that storm. I won't make you do it yourself. Like, I will be beside you in that storm.
Yeah, not in a codependent way, right?
Right.
But
in a supportive,
right? Like, I can't fix it, right? Or I can't make the storm.
Right. I'm not going to
stop.
make the storm go away, but I will be right by your side.
I didn't say that to you, right? Because old me 20 years ago might have said, well, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that storm go away.
No, right? You just said, basically, it was
maybe
like,
I can't.
I'll hold your hand while you walk through that storm. I'll walk through that storm with you. I won't let you don't have to go by yourself.
Right. So I've come a long way because the old me might have said, well, I'm going to do whatever I can to fix that for you. Right?
Yeah. I think I said,
that.
I feel like I'm walking through this storm by myself. I feel like, and I'm just so tired. And because I was like, I was going through a lot. I went through a lot of shit. And, it was just hard. It was hard. And I remember, I don't know what you asked me that prompted that response, but I was like, I'm just so sick of walking through this storm alone.
I'm glad you brought it up because I think it's a fair point.
Yeah.
Because we do have to make sure that we're crystal clear around this idea of supporting or being with someone that's going through something versus fixing it for them.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody who's having major depression, right? Well, let's go out for ice cream or let's go on vacation, right? That's an attempt. I think we talked about that a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
That's an attempt to fix or mask or just gloss over whatever somebody's going through. And
that'll make it all better.
You have to stop, right?
Yeah.
It's like the fair question is, I'm here, right? How can I best support you?
Yeah.
Right. What can I do? Right. And be open to what that person needs.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But to try and dismiss it or say, hey, I think I can fix it. That's not our place.
Right. It looks like you're in a really hard place. How can I help you?
Right. Later, how can I support you? Right.
Yeah. How can I support you?
Because later it creates resentment, right? Especially if you take someone down a pathway that is not one that they're buying into, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's super critical that. So you think we kind of covered all the bases for what we wanted? I feel like we could keep having this conversation, but...
Well, it could spin off into... We could spin so many other more plates here, but...
I love talking about this because relationships have been that particular topic you and I have learned so much about, but the fact that we've been able to grow within this relationship, it figured like that relationship is like a bubble that we exist in, but it keeps growing, it keeps getting larger, right? And it gives you the space for your bubble to kind of grow. My bubble kind of grows. And the relationship still holds us within it.
Right. It's like a snake that sheds its skin. I mean.
Oh yeah, you talked about that earlier. So that's another analogy for it.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you're just going to keep
getting bigger,
and change your skin.
It's that growth mindset, right? It's so super critical.
But you have to shed that skin.
You have to be willing to grow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you can't be in a jacket that's too tight. You need to be able to. The relationship is going to expand. There was an analogy in a New York Times article I read. It's really amazing. I'm going to provide a link for it. How to love, 7 ways to love, or something like that. Where he talks about he's like, he was married. His first relationship was a glass vase, and the second one was a basketball. And the analogy is, you don't want to be in a relationship where it's so fragile.
Right.
It was a crystal vase that, while it was beautiful, it shattered when it fell. When it was a little bit of, friction.
Be a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
Maybe
but a basketball keeps bouncing.
Right.
The relationship keeps bouncing back, right? So, and that's the thing.
Right.
That's a
little more resilient, right?
Yeah. It's more resilient. You just keep bouncing. It just keeps bouncing.
I love that. Yeah. We're going to have to talk more about this, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Just, to kind of give this people a little bit more digestible bites. But you are going to share that in the
Yeah, I'll share this list I created in the show notes.
And some of these podcasts you've been talking about, we'll share that too.
The links.
And I think just to recap for everybody, so we talked about, again, making sure you know what you're looking for. But again, looking for things is based on, in another person, based on knowing what's important to you.
What's important to you, yeah.
And then knowing what not to overlook, basically red flags, also comes down to what's important to you, is where things are very, very opposed, right? Or they're going to knock you off center, right? You figure you're grounded, you're centered, you know who you are, and somebody's out here doing something completely different, right? Knowing those red flags, right? Like, again, people don't talk to their family, things like that, right?
Yeah, people can't be disingenuous for long. Eventually, you're going to, rear their ugly head.
So I think for me, what I've heard is the goal is to be in a loving, committed relationship with another person where you and the other person are allowed to, as you said, be consistently genuine and authentic, right? I love that. I think that is so critical.
And trust.
That
trust
you're able to do that.
To be able to trust the other person and be vulnerable with them, you need to be able to be vulnerable. Let's face it, we all are. But you don't want to be afraid to tell that person how you really feel and be vulnerable and not be afraid to be rejected or, listen carefully, listen carefully to what they're saying, because you might put yourself out there and be vulnerable and then they respond in a way that you feel like was harmful, hurtful.
Right.
But the person may have just done that with you in mind. So
the good intentions, right? The growth mindset, right?
Be curious.
They're out for my growth. I'm
Yeah.
out for my growth. The relationship is all about growth. Be curious about, what does this mean? What are they telling me?
Right.
Right. How can it help me?
Don't jump to the conclusion don't assume someone's being hurtful if that's really not their pattern.
Yeah.
So, and that was a big thing. I was listening and, I was like, because my past would have me jump to that conclusion, right? I come from, you have no confidence in me. You think I can't do this, and you're always
you
like
think they're coming from
checking
a bad
up on
place.
me.
Right.
And that's what it feels like, but their intention is not that at all. So I think it's important to recognize those things.
Well, I feel like, talking about growth, I feel like this podcast growth, I feel like this is the best podcast we've done yet.
Yeah.
I don't know if our audience will agree, but I really appreciate everybody. But I genuinely love you, and I feel like I'm so happy that you decided to go down this path and do this podcast with me, because I feel like it's been an enhancement to our personal growth and the growth of this relationship.
Yeah, I feel like I've grown a lot. Just it took a lot of courage to sit in this seat and talk. Because I never really felt like I had a voice that was worth listening to. Well,
you've got a great, big, expansive, and beautiful voice. So thank you for sharing it with me and the rest of the world.
Thank you.
All right. We will see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.